My name is Rachel Parker, and I am 31 years old. For the past 5 years, I have been sending my parents $3,000 every single month, quietly, consistently, without asking for thanks. That adds up to $180,000 of my earnings that went straight into their household. And all the while, everyone in my family believed my older brother David was the one taking care of them. They told relatives, neighbors, anyone who would listen, that David was their provider, their pride, their wrath. David is 37 now, a decorated surgeon at St. Anne's Hospital. He has just been promoted to department chief, and the whole city seems to be buzzing about him. He wears the title like a crown, and my parents shine like royalty whenever they talk about him. Whenever people ask about their children, they beam and gush about their son, the doctor. Then, when I am mentioned, it is with an awkward pause, a shrug, and the words, "Oh, Rachel does accounting," as if my career is a footnote in a story where David is the shining star. The truth is that what I do is more than accounting. I manage financial strategies, budgets that stretch into the billions, responsibilities that touch thousands of employees and affect entire communities. But in my family's eyes, all of that means nothing compared to David wearing a white coat and having his name engraved on a brass office plate. It started small. 5 years ago, my parents confided that they were struggling with their mortgage after my father's retirement. They looked tired, worried, and though they never asked directly, I knew they needed help. I had just received a promotion at work, and I decided to step in. I told myself it was temporary, just until they found their footing. So I set up a transfer, $3,000 each month. It felt good at first, knowing I was helping them, but that feeling faded quickly when, at a family dinner, my mother lifted her glass and toasted David for saving their home. I remember staring at her, stunned, waiting for her to correct herself. She did not. My father chimed in, praising David for being the responsible son who never forgot his parents. The relatives applauded. I forced a smile, hiding the sting that spread through my chest. That pattern repeated again and again. When my mother got a kitchen renovation, everyone thanked David. When my father's medical bills were covered, it was David's generosity that was celebrated. Vacations, home repairs, even a new roof on the house, every credit went to him. I never spoke up. I thought maybe my silent support would, in time, earn me recognition. I thought maybe love meant doing the right thing without expecting applause. Instead, my silence made me invisible. My brother soaked up all the praise while I watched from the corner, smiling politely as though I agreed with their version of the truth. Meanwhile, I lived in a small apartment, drove a car that rattled every time I started it, and skipped vacations to make sure I never missed a transfer. My life shrank while theirs expanded on the back of my sacrifice. My therapist once asked why I never told them, why I allowed them to go on believing a lie. I told her they would not believe me, and honestly, I believed that myself. In our family, David's words always carried more weight than mine. If I spoke up, I imagined being dismissed as jealous or bitter. I imagined being told that I was exaggerating, or worse, trying to steal my brother's spotlight. So I kept quiet, carrying that secret like a stone in my chest, year after year, but a secret that heavy cannot be held forever. And it was destined to come out at the moment when my family least expected it, at the height of David's celebration, in a ballroom filled with 200 witnesses who believed the golden child was flawless. If you have ever been the overlooked one in your family, the one whose efforts disappear in the shadow of someone else, I know how lonely that feels. Share your story in the comments. You are not alone. I can still remember the look on my father's face the day I told them I had chosen finance over medicine. It was not anger exactly. It was disappointment, heavy and unspoken, carried in the downturn of his mouth and the narrowing of his eyes. My mother's response was sharper. Finance? But Rachel, with your grades, you could have gone to any medical school you wanted. Why throw that away? I tried to explain that I loved numbers, that I thrived in solving puzzles with balance sheets and strategies, but they brushed it aside. My father said enjoyment did not pay the bills. My mother sighed that she had always thought I would follow David's path. That was the day I realized no matter what I achieved, it would never measure up in their eyes. When I graduated at the top of my class, they barely clapped. When I landed my first job at a Fortune-ranked company, they sent a card with 2 short lines of congratulations. Meanwhile, every research paper David published earned him a family dinner in his honor. Every award, another framed photo on the wall. The contrast was not subtle, it was deliberate. and it carved a hollow place inside me where my sense of worth should have been. So when my parents confided about their mortgage, I thought maybe, just maybe, I could fill that hollow space with something real. If I became their provider, they would see me. If I gave them stability, they would respect me. Month after month, I sent the money. $3,000, without fail. Birthdays, holidays, emergencies, no matter what I was going through, I made sure that transfer happened. Over the years that added up, $180,000 could have been a down payment on my own home, a master's degree, the security of financial freedom. Instead, it became invisible fuel for a story where my brother was the hero. Every time I heard my mother talk about David paying for their medical bills, or my father praising him for generosity, I swallowed my pride and stayed silent. I thought I was doing it for love, but the truth is I was doing it for a kind of acceptance that never came. And silence has its cost. The more I bit my tongue, the more it wore me down. I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Martinez. After waking up one night with a tightness in my chest that would not let me breathe, she told me I was experiencing panic attacks. She asked what would happen if I just told the truth. I laughed bitterly and said they would never believe me. That was not paranoia, it was a lifetime of being dismissed whenever I dared to claim space. It was not just about money, it was about being erased. When David bought a new car, I recognized the timing of the down payment because it had matched the month I sent my annual bonus to my parents. When they went on a cruise for their anniversary, I had sent a larger transfer marked for something special. Yet, to the world, it was David who had given them that gift. I remember sitting at Easter dinner, my cousin Janet turning to me with a sympathetic smile. "It must be hard being David's sister," she said. "He's so accomplished. But hey, we all have our roles to play. David saves lives, and you do taxes." The table erupted in laughter. I laughed too, but inside, something cracked. That night was the beginning of the end of my silence. I realized no amount of quiet giving would ever change the narrative my family had written about me. They did not just fail to see me, they actively chose not to, and if they would not grant me acknowledgement, then I would claim it myself. I began to plan not out of revenge, but out of necessity. The first part of that plan was to stop hoping. I stopped waiting for recognition, stopped expecting that one day my parents would finally say, "Rachel, we are proud of you." I accepted they might never say it. The second part was to prepare. I gathered bank statements, records of every transfer, every memo line that said, "Love, Rachel." I documented everything, because I knew if the truth came out, David would try to twist it. I needed proof stronger than his charisma. And the third part was patience. I waited for the right moment, the one time when silence could no longer serve me. That moment came when my brother's career hit its peak, when the hospital celebrated his promotion in a grand ballroom with chandeliers and speeches and 200 witnesses hanging on his every word. That was the moment the truth demanded to be seen. You might think this sounds calculated, but it was more survival than strategy. When you spend years erased by your own family, the chance to be visible is not just tempting, it is necessary. I kept working, kept building my career, kept sending the money. Outwardly nothing changed. Inwardly I was gathering strength. Each transfer became less an act of devotion, and more a line of evidence, a mark in a ledger that one day would balance in my favor. If you have ever lived in someone else's shadow, you know the exhaustion of it. You know the way it eats at your confidence, how you start questioning whether you even deserve to stand in the light. I need you to hear this. You do. Your worth is not determined by who notices it. And sometimes the most radical act of love for yourself is to stop hiding what you have given. So I kept sending the money. I kept smiling politely while people praised David. But deep down, I was waiting for the day the truth would no longer be denied. That day was closer than anyone in that ballroom could have imagined. The night of David's celebration arrived with a kind of glittering perfection that made my stomach twist. The Grand Horizon Hotel had been transformed into a palace of light and luxury. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above the round tables draped in linen, so white it looked untouched by human hands. Each centerpiece was an arrangement of orchids so extravagant it must have cost more than a week's groceries for most people. The guests, nearly 200 of them, streamed into the ballroom in gowns and suits that shimmered under the lights. Doctors with polished smiles, board members with their elegant partners, young interns watching wide-eyed at the display of success. At the heart of it all stood my brother, David Parker, the golden son. He looked every inch the man of triumph in his tailored suit, his smile gleaming with confidence as if the night belonged solely to him. He was being honored as the youngest department chief in the history of Street Ann's Hospital. A banner stretched across the stage in bold gold letters, celebrating Dr. David Parker, excellence in leadership. My place was near the back of the room, at table 19, tucked close to the service entrance with distant relatives and people whose names I barely recognized. It was no accident. The front tables were filled with David's colleagues, hospital board members, and family friends who mattered more. From where I sat, I could just see my parents working the crowd near the stage, their faces glowing with pride as they accepted congratulations. My mother, in a new suit David had bought her, clung to his arm as though she were the star of the evening too. My father, steady in his navy blazer, looked like he had been waiting for this night all his life. When they greeted me at the entrance earlier, it had been with the briefest of hugs, the kind you give out of obligation, rather than affection. They had not looked my way once since then. I sat quietly in my simple black dress, sipping water while others clinked champagne flutes. "Do you work in medicine too?" a woman beside me asked, smiling with polite curiosity. She was someone's date, I think. "No," I said evenly. "I work with numbers." Her expression shifted in an instant, that familiar look of pity mixed with dismissal. "Oh, well, that's practical." Then she turned her attention back to the stage, already forgetting me. The sting was sharp, but familiar. I was used to being overlooked. What unsettled me more was the series of faces I recognized in the crowd. Not from family gatherings, but from the corporate world, people I had crossed paths with in meetings and conferences. They had no idea that the quiet woman at table 19 was the same Rachel Parker who oversaw billions at one of the largest financial firms in the country. My phone buzzed in my clutch. A message from my assistant. The board needed my final confirmation on tomorrow's meeting. They were waiting for my decision on whether to approve a $600,000 grant to Street Ann's Hospital. I slipped the phone away without answering. The decision would be made tonight, but not in the way anyone expected. David stepped up to the podium, tapping the microphone with the ease of someone who knew he belonged at the center of attention. The room fell silent. My parents beamed as he began his speech, thanking mentors and colleagues, speaking with polished charm about vision and leadership. His voice carried effortlessly, practiced and sure. As he spoke, I could not help but drift back to memories of my own achievements, graduating with honors, receiving promotions, leading financial teams that managed sums most people could not imagine. Each moment had been met with little more than a nod or a distracted, "That's nice," from my parents. Meanwhile, David's every accomplishment was celebrated with fanfare. Tonight was just the grandest example. The slideshow behind him flashed images of his journey, medical school, awards, surgeries, smiling patients. I counted 40 photographs, and not one included me. Even the family portrait from Christmas showed only my parents and David, because I had been the one behind the camera. As the applause swelled, my mother took the microphone. Her voice trembled with emotion as she praised David. "He has been our rock, our provider, the son every parent dreams of having." She paused, scanning the crowd until her eyes swept vaguely toward the back. "Of course we love both our children. Rachel is here too somewhere. She does accounting." A ripple of sympathetic laughter passed through the room. Someone patted my hand as if to console me. My cheeks burned, but I kept my expression steady. Inside, however, something shifted. The years of silence pressed against my chest like a weight, and I knew I could not hold it much longer. Another buzz from my phone. A second message, urgent, from the board. They needed the grant decision before their meeting overseas. Then another notification, an email from the chairman himself. $600,000 was no small amount, even for us. They wanted my signature tonight. The irony was too sharp to ignore. David's entire future as department chief depended on funding that I alone controlled. And still, I sat in the shadows while my parents toasted him as their provider. The applause rose again as David spoke of his plans for the department. "I have personally secured private funding," he declared, his confidence filling the room. "This will allow us to offer scholarships, to transform pediatric surgery, to change lives." I nearly laughed at the boldness of it. He was standing on a stage built on my sacrifice, yet he claimed it all as his own. Around me, heads nodded in admiration, my parents dabbing at their eyes. I felt my phone vibrate once more, a third message flashing on the screen. The board was waiting. The time had come. I rose from my chair slowly, as though pulled upward by a force greater than myself. My pulse pounded in my ears, but my face was calm, unreadable. Conversations around me trailed off as people noticed the lone figure at the back moving forward. Chairs scraped softly against the floor. 200 pairs of eyes began to follow me. I heard someone whisper, "Who is she?" I walked the long stretch toward the stage, my heels clicking steadily against the polished floor. When I reached the front, I did not ask for permission. I simply climbed the small set of steps and stood beside my brother. He blinked at me, confused, then tried to recover with a smile. "Everyone," David said. A laugh caught in his throat. "This is my sister, Rachel. She, works with numbers." The audience chuckled obligingly, the same way they had at my mother's earlier remark. I leaned into the microphone. My voice came out steady, clear, louder than I expected. "Yes, I work with numbers. And for the past 5 years, those numbers have included $3,000 every single month that I sent to our parents. That adds up to $180,000. Money that was quietly transferred from my account into theirs." The room shifted. A hush fell so heavy I could almost feel it pressing against my skin. Faces turned from amused to bewildered. My parents froze at their table near the front. My mother's hand clutched the edge of the tablecloth. My father's jaw tightened. "I wrote every transfer with a note," I continued, pulling out the neatly folded stack of statements from my clutch. "Love, Rachel. Month after month, year after year. Yet, somehow, I hear tonight that my brother has been the one providing for them. That he has been the one funding their home, their trips, their renovations. That is not true." David shifted beside me, his smile cracking. "Rachel," he said softly, his voice tight, "this isn't the time." "This is exactly the time," I replied, my words sharp enough to slice the silence. "Because tonight you told this room you secured private funding. Tonight our parents praised you as their rock, their provider. But the truth is, you have been taking what I sent them and claiming it as your own." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone at a nearby table murmured, "Is this real?" I turned toward my parents. "Mom, Dad, did you ever see my name on those transfers?" My mother's eyes flickered nervously. "Well, David handled the accounts. We just assumed he was the one sending it." I finished for her. I held up the statements high enough for the front rows to see. "These are the bank records. Every payment came from me." David stepped forward, his voice rising. "She's making this up. She's jealous. She's always been jealous." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. I took a breath, pulling out another set of documents. "Then explain this. Credit card bills, casino transfers, car payments, all traced back to the money I sent. You didn't just take credit, David. You stole. You gambled with it. You bought luxury for yourself while telling everyone you were supporting our parents." Murmurs spread like wildfire. My mother's face drained of color. My father gripped the arms of his chair, his knuckles white. David laughed weakly, though sweat glistened on his forehead. "This is ridiculous. She's twisting things." "Am I?" I pulled my phone from my clutch, scrolling to the live email waiting from the board. "Because right now, as we stand here, the hospital is waiting for me to approve a $600,000 grant. They think Dr. David Parker secured it. But the truth is, that decision lies with me, not you." The audience erupted in whispers. Some guests craned their necks to see my screen. Others stared at David in shock. "Rachel," my father finally said, his voice trembling with anger, "what are you talking about?" I looked straight at him. "I am the chief financial officer of Baxter Global, the same firm whose grant your son has been bragging about. I control that money, not him. And tonight, I decide where it goes." The room fell into stunned silence. I let the words sink in. Then, slowly, I tapped the microphone again. "For 5 years I have been invisible. For 5 years I have carried the burden while being told I was nothing. Tonight, I refuse to be invisible any longer." David lunged toward me, hissing under his breath, "Stop this before you ruin everything." I turned the screen toward him so only he could see the message. "You already ruined everything." I looked out over the crowd once more, lifting my phone so my voice matched the steady rhythm of my heartbeat. "Effective immediately, the $600,000 will not go to Street Ann's Hospital. It will instead be redirected to a foundation I have established for young people pursuing accounting and finance careers. Students who know the sting of being overlooked, the weight of being dismissed." Gasps again. A woman at the front clapped once, sharply, before catching herself. My mother's face twisted with disbelief. My father leaned back, as though the chair itself might swallow him. David shouted, his composure crumbling. She's lying, she's… Enough. I cut him off, my voice stronger than I had ever heard it. You built your success on my silence. That silence ends tonight. The ballroom buzzed with voices, urgent and rising. Journalists from local outlets who had come to cover the celebration scrambled for their phones. Cameras clicked, the spotlight that had been fixed on David swung, almost literally, onto me. For the first time in my life, I was no longer a shadow. David's face crumpled into a mask of fury and panic. His carefully polished image was unraveling before 200 witnesses, and he knew it. He jabbed a finger toward me, his voice cracking with desperation. She's unstable. You all know how families can be, she's exaggerating, inventing stories to get attention. But his words fell flat. The audience had seen the records in my hands, the confidence in my voice, the tremor in his. It was not me who looked unhinged. It was him. I stood tall at the podium. You call me unstable, David, but tell me who hides behind lies? Who steals from the very people who raised him? Who gambles away their security and then parades around as a savior? The murmurs grew louder. Someone at the front table whispered, I knew something was off. Another guest leaned toward her husband, eyes wide. The hospital board will have to investigate. I glanced at my parents. My mother's hand clutched her pearls, her mouth opening and closing without sound. My father's expression was one of stunned betrayal, his gaze shifting between me and my brother, as if struggling to comprehend what he had just learned. David tried again, this time lowering his voice, reaching for sympathy. Rachel, please, we're family. You don't have to do this here. We can talk privately. Don't embarrass us all. I looked at him, feeling the years of silence boiling away inside me. No, David, that's what you count on, isn't it? My silence. My willingness to step aside so you can shine. But silence has been my prison. Tonight it is my weapon. The audience broke into scattered applause, hesitant at first, then stronger. People were no longer fooled. They wanted the truth, and I was giving it to them. I turned back to the microphone. For those of you who work with David, who trusted him as a leader, you deserve to know this as well. The money he claims to have secured for the hospital, that was never his to promise. I am the chief financial officer of Baxter Global, and the board's funding requires my signature. Tonight, I am withdrawing that funding from Street Ann's. It will be redirected to a foundation that supports students in finance and accounting, young people who know what it means to be underestimated. Gasps echoed through the room. Phones were raised, recording every word. The shift was complete. David's night of triumph had become my night of revelation. David lunged closer, his voice a low growl. You'll regret this. You're destroying me. I leaned just enough so only he could hear. No, David. You destroyed yourself the moment you decided my life was yours to erase. Security moved subtly toward the stage, unsure if they would be needed. David backed away, his chest heaving, his perfect facade shattered. I raised the papers in my hand once more. For years I sacrificed quietly, believing that family meant love without acknowledgement. But love without respect is not love. It is servitude. I will not be invisible anymore. The room erupted not into chaos but into applause. Real applause rolling over me in waves. For once it was not David receiving it. It was me. I stepped down from the stage slowly, each step deliberate. Cameras followed my every move, whispers chasing me as I returned to my seat. My phone buzzed again, the board confirming receipt of my decision. $600,000, rerouted with one touch of my finger. At my table, a few guests looked at me with wide eyes, some with admiration, some with disbelief. The woman who had earlier dismissed me as practical leaned in. I had no idea, she whispered. I met her gaze steadily. That's because you never asked. The rest of the evening blurred. People avoided David, their once admiring smiles replaced with suspicion. He left early, storming out without a word to anyone. My parents sat stiffly at their table, refusing to meet my eyes. Later, as I slipped out into the cool night air, the city lights flickering against the glass of the hotel, I felt a strange calm wash over me. For the first time in years, the weight of silence was gone. The truth was out, undeniable. But this was only the beginning. The fallout would be long and painful. My brother's career was on the line. My parents' illusions had been shattered, and I, the daughter they had dismissed as ordinary, was no longer a secret. The following morning, the news had already spread. Local papers ran headlines about the dramatic confrontation. Social media buzzed with videos from the ballroom. Some called me courageous, others ruthless. But none could ignore me. The hospital board launched an immediate inquiry into David's conduct. They demanded explanations for his financial claims. When the truth emerged that he had fabricated his role in securing funding, that he had mishandled personal finances, their decision was swift. His promotion was revoked. He was placed on leave pending investigation. At home, my parents' silence was deafening. My mother called once, her voice small and trembling. "Why, Rachel? Why humiliate your brother like that?" I took a deep breath. "I didn't humiliate him, Mom. I told the truth. He humiliated himself by lying." She started to protest, but my father's voice cut in on the line. "Is it true?" His tone was hollow, but I could hear the cracks forming in his certainty. "Yes," I said firmly. "Every word. I have the records. You can see them yourselves." There was no reply, only silence. For once, I let it hang. I owed them no comfort. David tried to call me that week, but I ignored his number. I had nothing left to say to him. Meanwhile, I began setting up the foundation in earnest. Applications poured in from students across the country, bright young people with big dreams but little support. Each story reminded me of my younger self, desperate to be seen, to be valued. This time, I would make sure they were. In the weeks that followed, the Parker family name was whispered with a mixture of curiosity and scandal. My brother, once paraded as the golden child, could barely show his face in public without someone pointing or whispering. The hospital issued a statement announcing his suspension pending further investigation. News outlets replayed clips from the night of the gala, the moment when his carefully crafted image collapsed. I should have felt triumphant, but what I felt most was relief. For years I had carried the weight of silence, and now that it was gone, I could finally breathe. My days no longer revolved around monthly transfers or the gnawing ache of invisibility. Instead, I poured my energy into building the foundation I had promised that night. We called it the Parker Foundation for Financial Futures. Applications came from young people who dreamed of studying finance or accounting but lacked the means. I read through their essays late into the night, stories of single parents working double shifts, of first-generation college students determined to break cycles of poverty, of teenagers who had been told their dreams were too small. Each application reminded me of the loneliness I had felt, the hunger to prove myself, the desire to be more than what others assumed. At the same time, my parents struggled with the truth. For the first time in my life, I heard them argue openly with David. He accused me of ruining his career, but they demanded to know why he had stolen from them, why he had taken money meant for their security and turned it into his own luxuries. My mother called me again, her voice heavy with tears. "Rachel," she whispered, "I don't know what to believe anymore." "Believe the facts," I said softly but firmly. "Look at the records. Look at what he did, not what he says." She sobbed quietly, and for the first time, I felt not anger but a flicker of pity. My parents had built their world around an illusion, and tearing it down left them exposed, vulnerable. Still, I could not rescue them from it. They had to face the truth themselves. My father was quieter. When he finally spoke to me, it was with a voice stripped of certainty. "I should have paid more attention," he admitted. "I should have asked questions. You should have seen me," I replied, my words sharper than I intended. "You should have seen me years ago." There was no response. Perhaps he knew there was nothing he could say to erase decades of dismissal. As for David, the spiral only deepened. Reports surfaced about his gambling debts, about questionable prescriptions he had written to fund habits he could not sustain. Colleagues who once admired him now avoided his calls. His wife, humiliated by the public scandal, filed for separation. He sent me message after message, some begging for forgiveness, others raging with threats. I ignored them all. The foundation's first scholarship recipients were announced 3 months later. 10 students, each awarded enough to cover tuition and expenses for their first year. The ceremony was small, held in a modest community hall, nothing like the grandeur of the ballroom where my brother had been celebrated. Yet as I stood at the podium, looking into the faces of those students and their families, I felt a swell of pride unlike anything I had ever known. For once, what I built was acknowledged. For once, I was seen not through the shadow of my brother, but in the light of my own accomplishments. After the ceremony, A young woman approached me. She was no more than 18, her hands shaking as she clutched the certificate. I almost gave up, she admitted. People kept telling me accounting was boring, that I'd never make a difference, but now I feel like I can. I smiled at her, my heart aching with recognition. You can, I said, and when people don't see you, make them. Those words stayed with me. They were the lesson I had learned the hardest way possible. One evening, nearly 6 months after the gala, I visited my parents' home. It felt strange walking into the house where I had spent my childhood, the house I had helped save without them ever knowing. The air was heavy with tension, but also with something new, an undercurrent of humility. My mother met me at the door, her face lined with exhaustion. Rachel, she said quietly, come in. We sat in the living room, the silence thick. My father cleared his throat. We started therapy, he said, almost as if confessing a secret. Family therapy. The counselor says we need to learn how to listen better. I studied their faces. For once, there was no defensiveness, no dismissal, just two people grappling with their failures. We were wrong, my mother whispered. Her hands trembled as she twisted a tissue. We were wrong not to see you, wrong to let David's shadow blind us. I don't know if we can fix it, but we want to try. The words I had longed to hear for so many years did not bring the rush of satisfaction I had imagined. Instead, they left me with a bittersweet ache. I nodded slowly. Trying is a start, I said, but respect isn't a gift you give me now. It's something you should have given all along. They nodded, eyes downcast. It was not absolution, but it was the first step toward something different. That night, as I drove home, I realized I no longer needed their validation. The girl who had sent money in silence had been desperate for acknowledgement. The woman I had become knew her worth regardless. For the first time, I felt free. If you have ever drawn a boundary and been told you were selfish, know this, you are not. Boundaries are not walls to keep others out. They are doors that allow love to enter only when it comes with respect. And respect is not negotiable. A year has passed since that night at the Grand Horizon, and the landscape of my life has changed completely. My brother, once celebrated as untouchable, now works far from the spotlight. The investigation at the hospital ended with his resignation, and though he tried to rebuild elsewhere, his reputation followed him. The arrogance that once carried him through every room is gone. He rarely reaches out, and when he does, it is usually to ask for money I will not give. My parents are different too. Therapy has chipped away at the pedestal they built for David and forced them to see the daughter they ignored. They do not gush or boast about me the way they once did about him. But when we speak, there is a softness in their voices, a careful respect I never thought I would hear. They attend every foundation event, not for the applause, but to sit quietly in the audience and witness the work I do. That, in itself, is enough. The Parker Foundation has grown beyond anything I first imagined. We have awarded dozens of scholarships, partnered with universities, and even established mentorship programs where professionals guide students who are finding their way in finance. Each success story feels like a stitch repairing a wound that stretched across years of invisibility. These students remind me daily why I chose this path, not for recognition, but for the chance to create opportunities I never had. As for me, I have stopped living small. I moved into a home that is my own, paid for with my own hard work, not sacrificed for anyone else's approval. I travel when I want to, not when my schedule bends around obligations. I laugh more, I breathe easier, and most importantly, I no longer apologize for existing in the light. Looking back, I do not regret the years I gave, even though they were misunderstood. They taught me resilience, they taught me the cost of silence, and they taught me the power of truth when spoken at the right time. To those who have ever felt invisible in their own families, hear me when I say this. You are not a shadow. You do not need to shrink so others can shine. If they cannot see you, it does not mean you are not worthy of being seen. Sometimes, the only way to step out of the shadows is to tell your story, even if your voice shakes. Being seen is not a privilege you earn. It is a right you already have, and when you claim it, no one can take it away again. If my story resonates with you, share your own in the comments. Your words may be the light someone else needs to find their way. And if you want to hear more stories that remind you of your worth, subscribe. Together, we can make sure no voice remains invisible.